week of this is the third week of training on the inclusive carbon standard for component methodology developers. In the first week, what we covered was the principles used in the development of component methodologies. We also looked at the methodology development manual, which is there to provide guidance in the development of your methodologies. And then last week, what we did is we introduced a platform, and we gave an idea of how to navigate within the platform in terms of accessing your information and information about the component methodologies. We then also started with an example additionality component methodology, where we showed you how to go about capturing the methodology on the platform. We got to a point where we were ready to test the component methodology, which one has to do in the context of an example project. Excuse me. Within the context of an example project, you provide a small set of data that you can then prove or show how your component methodology works. This week, we will continue the process with that methodology and two other methodologies, where we will then go through the process a couple of times in terms of capturing some of the information required for component methodology within the context of a project. Today, Kenneth will be, Kenneth is hiding, but he'll take us through the process from where Serena left us last week. Thanks, Ken.
I don't think there was much. There was the testing of the example project, which was giving an error. Serena did give me some notes as to why the error was there. There was an incompatible baseline and monitoring component methodology, which I guess highlights a bit that when you're developing your methodology, you need to make sure that you are doing it, that it's compatible with what you intend to use it for. But that has been fixed now. But we can carry on to looking at the baseline component methodology, and then we'll go back to the example project. So just as a principle, the baseline methodology obviously looks at what the scenario is before you implement the project. Sorry, that's not the word. And obviously the baseline component methodology has to align with whatever that scenario might be for your project. So today we're looking at just a simple baseline of a renewable energy project that is displacing electricity from the national grid. I've just logged in. I haven't gone anywhere yet on the system. So this is what it'll look like when you first log in. I'm going to go through the whole methodology first, and then if we have time, I'll run through recreating it, a couple of the points, just as a matter of time. So if we look for methodology, next one. So, as you can see here, we've got the description and everything already that you would input in the setup. So we give it a name, which actually is somewhere else. And then just the brief description. So this one is the baseline for projects supplying solar renewable energy into specifically the national power grid. We discussed the applicability. So we upfront stating where the methodology would be applicable to certain projects. And in this case, it's applicable to any renewable energy project that's providing electricity to the grid, and to projects that haven't been transferred from another registry or standard. Then like with the other one, we have to give a motivation for why we're creating a new component method. And in this case, obviously, we haven't yet got a baseline for the renewable energy projects. So that forms our motivation. And then we list the potential compatibilities. So it's potentially compatible with other component methodologies that deal with renewable energy. And obviously this isn't submitted yet, so none of the compatibilities are built into the system right now. That's it for high-level stuff. You obviously select things like what the type is, which would be baseline in this case, and it would be applicable to emission reduction projects. And the sectoral scopes which would be relevant are the energy-related ones, including the distribution, the demand, and any of the other industries. Okay. Then, like Serena went through with the additionality methodology, we start by putting in the qualitative inputs that a project owner would have to fill in. And you can see we've got two groups. So the first one deals with the applicability criteria for the project, which is covered in a bit more detail in the methodology manual. But if we look at it here, we've got what the criteria would be for a project that it would have to meet to be eligible to use this methodology. So here it's yes or no tick boxes for the project owner's input. So the first one would be just confirming that it is a renewable energy project. There is no direct supply to a specific client, where there might be a contract that states whether the renewable energy is green or not. And then again, there's the help text that goes along with it. So this then gets shown to the project owner when they're filling in the project form. And then we create the options, the yes or no options. Then similarly, it's only applicable to projects that deliver the electricity into the national grid. So it's a confirmation again. And then the last criteria we have is whether it has been transferred or not from another carbon credit program. And again, we create the selection options, and the project owner can then select the applicable ones. And our second group of inputs is sort of some qualitative information around how calculating the grid emission factor and things like that, and some supporting documents. So the first one would be, this is a methodology for a national grid. So you have an input to state what the host country grid is, where the project would be operating. And here the help text is useful in that it just provides an extra context for the project owners, and the input type would be a single line text. We don't usually expect a country to be too many characters, so a single line should be sufficient. Then we've got a number input just to capture the carbon dioxide emissions from the energy generation that's currently on that electricity grid in the host country. And that's obviously all the fossil fuel derived energy generation. That would obviously be a number input, and it would be input again in the calculations, which we'll get to in a moment. This just allows us to then reference it. So the next input is the source documentation for those emissions. So this then allows someone coming afterwards and wanting to use the methodology, they can see exactly where the emissions that went into the grid emission factor came from. So some examples here would be Eskom publishes their annual report, and the annual report generally has their emissions in it. So we'd input the emissions here, and then the upload could then be used to upload the supporting evidence for that. Then we also put in what year the emissions were provided for. Obviously, you want to use the electricity and the emissions from the same year to do your calculation. It's also just a number input. Then we've got another single line of text, which is just how much electricity was generated and fed onto the grid in the year that we've set as our reference year. And again, then there's a file upload input to provide the source document. And sometimes the source documents might be the same, but it's good to provide the user the option that if they are different, they can upload a different document. That's all for the sort of qualitative inputs. It's a very straightforward methodology. So if we go into now the actual calculations and the details there, the calculations do two things. They calculate the grid emission factor that's used, as well as the actual baseline emissions. So our first set captures the monitoring periods for the project. They're obviously consecutive 1, 2, 3, and so on. They link to the period start and end. I can't remember if this gets generated automatically, actually.
The monitoring periods do get generated automatically. Like is the parameter, you still have to capture the start and end.
Then there's a set for the name of the host country for the electricity grid. So, for example, we could have RSA grid if we're looking at a project in South Africa. This just gives us an option to explicitly define where we're calculating the grid emission factor for. And then the last set we have is the usual months. So we look at the months for which the electricity is generated. We have our subscripts for the or the symbols for the sets, which we've kept in for months, and they are Unix timestamps. All the time-related inputs are timestamps. Then if we look at the parameters that we need, so first off, we need the electricity consumption, which is, I guess, a confusing way of referring to it because it's the generation that is being fed onto the grid. But basically, this would be the electricity that is generated by the project that displaces the grid electricity. And we've given it a symbol, it's an input parameter, and we've given it a unit. Then we've got a lot of output variables. So we've got the baseline emissions. This is baseline emissions per month, which is calculated. And then we also have the baseline emissions during the monitoring period as a separate parameter. So this parameter will give us what the baseline emissions were in each month. And then we have an equation that will take this value and put it into the correct monitoring period so that we can actually get a value for the credits in the right time period. Then we have a parameter for the grid emission factor. So this is going to be calculated based on the emissions and the electricity. We've given it a symbol, It's obviously not time dependent because we've got one value for the period we're looking at, and it's the output variable. And here we're looking at tons of CO2 per megawatt hour. And then we'll also touch on the landmark value. I don't know how much detail was touched on what landmark values are. But here we've got a separate parameter to capture a landmark value for the grid emission factor.
Maybe we could just recap there. A landmark value is a value that's been previously verified. So it is possible that another project that uses the same methodology and uses the same location. And once that's verified, it means that we'll then allow other projects to use that value without needing to verify it again.
Then we've got, so moving on to the next parameter, we've got the electricity that gets imported or might be supplied by an independent power producer onto the grid. This is obviously assuming a model where there's a central utility that then imports electricity from other private suppliers. And that's obviously we've got our symbol and it's a constant and the unit. Then these two parameters are what get generated automatically by the system. And this is captured when the project owner creates the monitoring periods. These parameters auto-populate. Then we've got the total carbon dioxide emissions from the electricity utility. That's just the total CO2. It's constant. And then we've also got the electricity that gets generated by the national utility. And we'll look at the equations now as to how we get the grid emission factor from that. So then if we look at the equations, the grid emission factor is a fairly straightforward calculation. We take the amount of CO2 that was generated to generate the electricity on the grid, and we divide that by the total amount of electricity available for distribution. So that's the electricity from the national utility, and then the electricity that was generated either through private procurement by IPPs or imports from another country. It's important what order the equations are built, because this EF grid is then used in the very next equation, so we have to declare it first. So we can now calculate the baseline emissions, which is also straightforward. It's the electricity consumption, or the electricity that gets generated by the project and is sent out to the grid, and we multiply that by the grid emission factor. And that will give us a monthly value for the baseline emissions. Then this is where we use the monitoring period set. So we assigning the monthly baseline emissions to which monitoring period they will fall in. So we've got our parameter for the baseline emissions for each monitoring period. And then essentially what this is doing here, it's looking at what the month's value is for that element. And then if it's within the monitoring period that's been defined. So if we're in monitoring period 1 of MP, so that would be the first set element, then it would check what the start and end date was for monitoring period 1. And if the baseline emissions for that month falls within that period, it will sum it. If not, then it will exclude it. And then this thing gets used when you generate the emission reductions for that monitoring period, and then the credits. And then lastly, we just set the landmark value of the grid emission factor as the same as the calculated grid emission factor. Maybe pause here if there are any questions.
No questions so far.
Okay, then let me just check what Celine called based on the example project. And we can move on to the looking at the example project, which has got both last week's component methodology and this one as part of it. That's in my projects. Research. This one. Yeah, so this is the one that Serena fixed the compatibility issue, so everything should be compatible now. So this is obviously the example project that we would use to demonstrate both of these component methodologies. Wonderful. So as part of the example project, you have to complete the project form. So those questions that we were looking at in terms of the baseline component methodology are here. So for the applicability criteria, we would answer. So in this case, yes. So yes. Also yes. I'm not going to answer these questions. I don't know where Serena got the values from. But when you're creating your example project, you'll go through and fill in the relevant input so that when the methodology is coming to be approved, whoever's doing the approval and the audit can see how it might be used in a real world application. We're going to look at the document and data. You see here, so here are sets for everything. So we've got that same electricity grid host. We're looking at South Africa. We just have one monitoring period as an example, and then the months are there from last time. We look here, we can look at our baseline electricity. You can see here there's values for all the months that we have as sets. Just find the right one. So we can see here we've got total emissions from the national utility. So it's a so there is a value here. So the current value is this 96,000. And we can see all the parameter details. These are input when you create the parameter. I wonder if we run the model and see if it works. So if we click calculate. So we can see here it was completed successfully, so that compatibility error was resolved. And now if we click results, we can view what the output variables are. If we go and find our grid emission factor, we can view the results for that. And the current value that's been calculated is 0.8, based on the values that were put into the example project. I think if there's no questions, we can practically create a draft new component methodology. Okay. It's a very simple, so it should be quick. Unless there are any questions, which I can't see any.
There's no questions in the chat.
Okay. Then we go back to my methodologies. We can create a new one. The screen looks the same as was last week, with the overview of the process. So we call this baseline demo. And give it a description. Our motivation is demo. Yeah, then if we select the type, it's a baseline component methodology, and it's for emission reduction projects. The sectors that we're looking at are the energy sectors.
Is that emission reduction by default?
Yes, so you can, so there's two options, there's emission reduction or greenhouse gas sequestration. So it would be applicable to the emission reduction projects. And compatibilities. See, this is new. So we can list the methodology on the directory, or if it's incomplete, so others can see where the methodology is being worked on. Okay, so now we've got our methodology that's been created. We can come and create our input fields. So we start with the qualitative inputs. So our first input field was the applicability criteria. And all your project, all the component methodologies will have input group like this to highlight what types of projects it's applicable to. Okay, then we select it goes in the project form, and it will be the first question group. Another one was our baseline emissions. And this one also goes in the project form, and it's our second group. Okay, now we can start adding our inputs. So our first input was a selection. So I need to cheat now. I'm going to copy paste. So we have a question and then some help text just to provide some clarity. And now we can create our options. So our first option is yes, and it's a yes or no selection. So we just need yes or no. We can select whether it's a required input or not. And then in the sequence of the group, it's the first question. Then we can, the next one, which is also a selection. I think that one is quite self-explanatory, but you can add some more help text. It's also a yes or no. But you can add, so you can add more than two. So you can add as many options as you need to here. It's a required field, and this was the second one in our inputs. We create the last one, which was whether it's been transferred or not. It's also yes or no. Okay, now we can move on to creating the actual calculation bits of the methodology. So as you can see, the monitoring period set has already been created, but we need a couple more. The first one we need is for the electricity in the host country. And this one, symbols. And there's no unit for this one. And then we need our month set as well. Month. Our symbol is M. Description, and then our unit here is the Unix timestamp. Okay. Then we move on to creating our parameters. So again, the monitoring period ones are created by default automatically. So our first parameter will be baseline electricity consumption. Give it a symbol. And we select what type of parameter it is, what the unit is. You can give it a description. And what the purpose is. So let's calculate baseline emissions. Now we select the set. So in this case, our set for the electricity generation will be months, because we're capturing that monthly. We're capturing data monthly, put it as a manual data entry. You can see there's several different options to provide for the source of the data, and that might be electricity meter, check against backup meter maybe, and then whether it's included in the project report for the validation, and include, you can tick what we want to include. So maybe it might be a lot of data, so maybe we don't want to include those in the project report, but we might want to put them in the monitoring report. And whether there's any comments. And we're going to do that several more times for the other parameters. So the baseline emissions is now the output variable, so you'll see some of the inputs change because of that. Mm. And our set is again months, so the sets need to match. And maybe we include that in the monitoring report as well. Then we need the baseline emissions for the monitoring period. And these are required parameters. And our set here will be different. Our set here will be the monitoring periods. Next one is our emission factor. And that's calculated. Times. And then this one does not have a set. We're calculating it once off, so there's no set that's required. And let's include that in both the project report and the monitoring report. Okay, the important RPP electricity parameter. This is constant units in gigawatt hours. And the source of the data is the manual data entry. Okay. Put that in both as well. Last two, the total two. And the last parameter we need is the total electricity that's generated. Yeah, it's also constant. 1 second, kilowatt hours, so that our units are consistent. In the description. And it's also to calculate the emission factor. Manually. So now, I think I'm still. I must learn more value. Minus one. So this is the. Still an output variable. Units are the same. Then we still don't have a set that's applicable. And we include it. Yeah, so now we have everything. We can then create our equations. So for the parameters, it doesn't matter too much as the order that things are created. But for the equations, it's very important. If the equations are not created in the right order, it will give you an error. Because it's trying to calculate a value based on something that hasn't run the calculation for yet.
So you may notice if you scroll up a little bit further, we did add some criteria to help with the guidance on creating equations. So those are the things that we mentioned last time, or maybe some of them still need to be put there. It's to remember that both the equations and the parameter names in the equations are case sensitive. So you need to watch for that. Also, what we recommend with the constants is that a constant should be used when a value in the context of a project doesn't change. But if you use a universal constant like pi or the ideal gas constants, those numbers you should give as numbers in the equations, but then provide a description in the comment for the equation. It's just to help separate the idea between those things that change in the context from project to project and those things that are universal across all projects.
I think that's, yeah. It's probably the end. Okay, so first one, the name. Description. And then we put in the equation, so you can also copy the symbols from the table here. So it would be the symbols here are what must be used to reference that parameter in the equation. So first we would calculate the emission factor, and then we can calculate the baseline emissions. So here we're calculating it for months. So we need to select a set for our equation. Because our output has got M as the set as well. This baseline emissions. The type description. And then put our equation. So we declare what our variable is. And we give our equation. See, because this is a calculated variable, we need to calculate it first and then we can use it in the calculations. Then we need to create the equation to map the monthly emissions into the separate monitoring periods. So here our set would be the monitoring periods, not the months anymore. Name, description again. And then we create our equation. Okay, then. Set, and then you're going to use the sum. We're going to tell it we're looking at the values for months. Where it will stop. So basically we're summing everywhere where the month is between the start and end date of the monitoring period. And we're going to
Just to repeat what's happening with Project Element. Project Element is it's a special set that's available when you are building your equations. And what happens is sometimes you may have an index that has a value, but is also a placeholder for iterating through values. So MO could be related to the number of the month within a year that's really stored as text. But month value would then convert that to an actual number, like 1 for January or 2 for February and so on. So this is just to work with indexes and whether you're actually talking about the value of the month or the name of the month. If that can be simplified like that.
the last one now. Value is just creating that equation for the landmark values. So for this one, we have a set for host country. And again, give it a name. Description. And then we're going to give our equation. Oops. Yeah, so we have everything completed, and then we can go and then create an example project. Description, select sectoral scope, and now we choose what component methodologies we use. Obviously, these should be compatible. I'm just making sure I get the right ones. So we select our project details, and we select our additionality. So that was the one we created last week. Was investment analysis. And we've got our baseline. So this we are busy with the baseline methodology. So this is the methodology that we've got here. But we can use more than one baseline component methodology. So you could be developing this baseline methodology, but it may be compatible with another baseline methodology that you might want to show.
An example there could be if you have a landfill site and you want to flare and you want to generate electricity. So then you would need two baselines. One baseline for the emissions related to flaring, and then another one with the emissions related to the grid electricity that you may be displacing.
Cool. And then you select your monitoring one. This one I know is compatible with the others. And if you do want to show the tags, you can select that, but that's an optional selection. Then this is what the project table looks like. So a description would be here. We've got the component methodologies that we're using. And then we'd start by completing the project report. If we do the applicability criteria again, and select yes. And this will also help in that it shows exactly how another project owner user would see the methodology. And when they come to register an actual project. I don't have demo data, so let's see how it goes. Okay, so if we start adding data, let's start by adding our sets. Period. Add a monitoring period. Let's start our crediting period from today. Let's do 10-year period length. And let's add our first monitoring period. Let's make it to the end of the year. now we should see. We can now see that this monitoring period here now has one element in it automatically added. And then let's add a month. So we get a Unix command. Oops. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, so now we've got our sets. So obviously we could add more than one month there. We can then go and capture all our parameters. So let's capture electricity into data. Because we only have 1 month, we can do this manually. And we can also upload supporting evidence for value we're using. Okay. Yeah, so now we can start. So important RPP. I'm gonna put a default value in there. Obviously, you check this and have some sort of supporting evidence for that. So if we try and edit these parameters from monitoring periods, it goes straight to the monitoring period tab. We go to the emissions. What? Value for that. Okay, positive generated. I think I'm going to have to put in values for them. Everything else on top.
Yeah, the electricity generation.
Let's check what it says on still complete. Okay, so you still need to put in cash flow.
The back.
What an error.
Right.
That's an investment analysis one. Maybe because we didn't put actual information in. We can try.
That's a person.
Let's put in. by hands. And so you see
that's also
now it's not defined, so now we go back to the data and so other parameters that I need to add.
I think there's a third one.
So
You gave the person
value.
to. The first one.
Yes, so there may error, but I don't actually know what error means.
So what's quite useful is below it shows the model text. And sometimes you may get an error where it says something's already been defined. And you can then come and look in the model text and see there are those lines that say param and then the parameter name, and then it either defines it in terms of where to get the data, or it actually explicitly gives it a number. So there's the first month value, which we are defining there. Do we see if it's defining it in this? Because it's putting it from the table. Yeah. So in that line over there,
Yeah,
we're assigning a value. And then we're also assigning an explicit value. So we shouldn't have given it a default value. Okay, but this is where we get to a point where it's the practice to find
yeah,
errors within the model. So we can go on and on like this until we narrow down all the problems. But I think maybe we pause at this stage because I'm curious to see if any of the people in the call have tried to build any of their own methodologies. And if their challenges have come earlier in the definition of the methodology, or have you actually got to a point where you've tried to calculate the value in an example project? So not yet, Kristen. Soon.
Yes, that's right. Soon.
Okay. Has everyone been able to register on the platform? Okay.
Are you referring to registering as a developer?
Anyone in the call, whether they've been able to go and register, log in, perhaps tried starting a methodology.
You know, so far I haven't had problems with that.
Okay, yes, sometimes Excel is a good place to start because everyone's familiar with how Excel works. And building a model there and then trying to transfer it afterwards. Mike, it looked like you want to say something. Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry, no, I just joined late. I didn't want to say something other than hello.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Sorry, apologies. Tried to sneak in, but you caught me.
Well, we got to a point where we were picking on a person in the call to give a demonstration of the project that they've been building. I'm just teasing you. I was going to pick on me. Did you and Akwan get together to try and build something?
No, he had to go to Hammanskraal.
Okay.
So we didn't get together. Switch
So
my
Mike,
video.
tell us about her methodology.
Well, no, my methodology I can describe in 2 words. It's as far as you got last time.
Okay.
Sorry.
Has anybody tried to replicate the methodology that we developed last time? Okay, cool. So I think at this stage, on Thursday, we're planning on going through preparing a monitoring component methodology. Generally, the monitoring component methodologies are a little bit more complex in terms of the number of parameters and equations. But it'll be very much similar to what we've done in the last 2 sessions, where we will step you through an example that we've prepared. And then we should get to a point where we're able to calculate emission reductions from an example project. So at this stage, probably if there no questions, I don't know if anyone from the Prometheum team wants to add anything. Okay. And then I think we probably end here then. And then we'll catch up again on Thursday.
This is level 1.
Thank you, Kenneth. Thank you, Philip.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks
Thanks,
from your
Kenneth.
side.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.
Cheers.